The United Nations 2004 Human Development Report links cultural liberty to language rights and human development and argues, and this has to do with the parents' choices, it argues that there is no more powerful means of encouraging individuals to assimilate to a dominant culture than having the economic, social and political returns stacked against their mother tongue. Such assimilation is not freely chosen if the choice is between one's mother tongue and one's future. Most linguistic majorities have all educational language rights. For instance, native Danish speakers in Denmark, native German speakers in Germany, English speakers in the US have all educational and other language rights, and they take them for granted, but only for themselves. Most indigenous or tribal peoples and linguistic minorities and dominated people, even if they are not minorities, like in many African countries, have very few linguistic rights, and especially almost none in education. When all children attend school, and we know that there are lots of children who are not in school yet, then linguistic rights in education are necessary for any group to reproduce itself as a group, or as a people, or as a nation. Linguistic rights are necessary for maintaining linguistic and cultural diversity and as a mediating factor to maintain biodiversity on Earth. And the most central linguistic right, and in my terminology, linguistic human right, in education is the right to mother tongue medium education in non-fee state schools. Language rights are one way of promoting high levels of multilingualism and school achievement, a way of promoting integration in a country, in a state, for instance, this harmonious, balanced integration, and defending people against forced assimilation. They are one way of promoting positive state policies towards minority languages, promoting the maintenance of the world's linguistic diversity, and promoting conflict prevention, because not having linguistic rights very often promotes conflict, and promoting self-determination. I mean, I could talk about this for 2 months without stopping. The other part of my background, before I come to the educational models and so on, violations of human rights. And first, a summary. The education of indigenous, tribal and minority children in most countries today violates the right to education, as this is formulated in many international covenants and charters and so on. Sociologically and educationally, the education that we have today for most of these people through the medium of dominant languages can be termed genocide, according to the UN Genocide Convention. Legally, it can be seen as a crime against humanity. The maintenance of diversity is counteracted by the increasing dominance of English and other dominant languages. These are often learned subtractively at the cost of mother tongues, instead of additively in addition to mother tongues. And that means that schools participate through assimilationist, genocidal, subtractive education in processes of linguistic capital dispossession and in reproduction of poverty. And when I talk about reproduction of poverty, I use Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate in economics, and his theories about how to understand poverty. This is one expert paper that we wrote for the United Nations Permanent Forum on indigenous issues, indigenous children's education and indigenous languages, and here we show some of these things. This expert paper contains sociological and legal argumentation where we show that to educate indigenous and minority children through a dominant language in a submersion program or even early exit transitional program where you have a few years through the medium of your mother tongue and then you are transferred to dominant language medium education. Both these types of education violate the human right to education. And this right is in many international human rights documents, also in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this convention has been ratified by all other UN member states except 2, Somalia and the United States. Educational language rights, especially the right to mother tongue medium education, are thus among the most important rights for any minority. Without them, a minority whose children attend school usually have to accept subtractive teaching through the medium of a dominant majority language. It cannot reproduce itself as a minority. It cannot integrate but is forced to assimilate. The children cannot as a group achieve the educational goals, even if some individuals may succeed, and I think we have some of those individuals here too. They do it despite the school, not because of the way the school is organized. What language rights should individual children then have in education? And if we take OSCE, High Commissioner on National Minorities, the Hague recommendations regarding the education rights of national minorities, and for instance the United States is a member of OSCE, this was an attempt to interpret international human rights law in relation to education of national minorities. What we recommended, and I was part of the small group doing these recommendations. Most of the people were lawyers, but there were a couple of us educationists. What we say there is that for minorities, mother tongue medium education is recommended at all levels, also in secondary education. And this includes bilingual teachers in the dominant language as a second language. And you can obviously interpret it for the context that we are discussing. But for instance, in the United States, to have a monolingual English-speaking teacher as teacher of English to immigrant and minority students, that teacher is per definition incompetent if that teacher does not know the languages of her or his students. And we also say in the explanatory notes that submersion type approaches, whereby the curriculum is taught exclusively through the medium of the state language, and minority children are entirely integrated, meaning assimilated, into classes with children of the majority, are not in line with international standards. And I am not going to do any applications of any of this to China. That is up to you to do it. I am talking from a global, international point of view. Then some of my own things. I think that a universal covenant of linguistic human rights, if we ever get it, and we might, because UNESCO seems to have some plans now to work in this direction. This covenant should guarantee at an individual level, I'm not talking about community level at all, but at an individual level. Firstly, in relation to the mother tongue or mother tongues, that everybody has the right to identify with their mother tongue and have this identification accepted and respected by others, including the state. And they should have the right to learn the mother tongue or mother tongues fully, orally, meaning in spoken mode when physiologically possible, which is not always possible for deaf people, for instance, and in writing. And this presupposes that minorities are educated mainly through the medium of their mother tongues and within the state-financed educational system. Secondly, in relation to other languages, this covenant or convention should guarantee that everybody whose mother tongue is not an official language in the country where she or he is resident has the right to become bilingual or trilingual if they have two mother tongues in the mother tongue and one of the official languages in the country according to their own choice. Thirdly, in relation to the relationship between languages, this covenant should guarantee that any change of mother tongue is voluntary, not imposed. And for it to be voluntary, it includes knowledge of long-term consequences of changing languages, as I said when I talked about parents.